In the burning summer heat of the 12th century, a nobleman in Persia raised a silver goblet to his lips. Inside was something no peasant could believe possible: ice. Real, solid, glittering frost in the middle of the desert. As he drank, beads of condensation slid down the cup, pooling on the marble floor like melted jewels. Outside, the sand could scorch a man's feet within seconds. Inside, the air smelled of roses and cold water. How did they do it? How did medieval people create ice when the world around them was on fire? To understand that, you must first imagine a world without machines. No electricity, no refrigeration, no artificial chill. Once winter was gone, so was cold itself. The wealthy would pay fortunes for even a bowl of snow, and the poor could only dream of the memory of frost. Yet somehow, across centuries and continents, men and women learned to trap the cold, to make winter last through the blazing months of summer. And they did it not with magic, but with intelligence so advanced it seems impossible even now. The truth begins in the deserts of Persia, where temperatures could climb above 40 degrees by noon, but nights turned cold enough to bite. There, long before Europe ever dreamed of refrigeration, Persian engineers found a way to summon ice out of thin air. They built enormous domes called yakhchals, ice pits that looked like clay mountains rising from the sand. To the untrained eye, they were just storage huts. But inside lay one of the greatest engineering secrets of the medieval world: the art of freezing water without fire. These structures used nothing but geometry, wind, and earth to defy the sun. At night, open pools were filled with shallow layers of water. As the desert temperature plunged, the top layer froze. Thin, delicate, but enough. At dawn, the ice was carefully broken, carried into the domed chambers, and buried beneath straw and ash to insulate it. Each night, more layers formed. By the end of winter, the yakhchal was full, a frozen mountain sleeping beneath the desert. Then came the miracle. In the heart of summer, when the sun was merciless, nobles could send servants into those cool, dark chambers to retrieve blocks of ice. They used it to cool their rooms, preserve food, and even serve faluda, a chilled dessert of rice noodles, rose water, and crushed ice. Imagine that, ice cream in the desert 1,000 years before refrigeration. It was a triumph not of wealth, but of understanding. Proof that human will could tame even the most brutal climate. And yet this secret didn't stay buried in the sands. Word spread along the Silk Road, from Persia to Arabia, and from Arabia to Europe. Traders whispered of cold houses that held winter's breath even in July. Kings wanted them. Monks tried to build them. And soon, the impossible dream of summer ice became a symbol of divine favor, of mastery over nature itself. To see ice glinting beneath the desert sun was to glimpse something sacred, a human rebellion against the laws of the world. For peasants, it was a myth. For rulers, it was power. But for the men who built those hidden domes, it was proof that knowledge could outlast heat, that patience could bend the seasons themselves. The miracle of medieval ice began not with magic, but with geometry, mud, and the night sky. And this is where our story truly begins, in a world that refused to accept the limits of nature, and found a way to make summer feel like winter. If the medieval world had sorcerers of cold, they were found in Persia. Long before Europe's castles dreamed of comfort, Persian engineers were already defying the desert. To the untrained eye, their yakhchals looked like strange beehive domes made of mud and lime, rising from the dunes like ancient tombs. But inside, they hid a power that would astonish any traveler. Rooms so cold that even in mid-July, a man could see his breath. Each yakchal was a masterpiece of natural engineering. Its walls, made of a special plaster called saruj, a mixture of sand, clay, ash, lime, and goat hair, were waterproof and heatproof. Beneath the dome lay a deep pit where ice was stored, kept cool by both the thick walls and the power of airflow. At night, when the desert air turned bitterly cold, water was poured into long, shallow channels outside the dome. The temperature difference between night and day did the rest. Thin sheets of ice formed as the heat bled into the open sky. By dawn, the ice was scraped up, carried carefully into the dome, and covered in straw and sawdust. But that was only half the trick. The Persians also mastered evaporative cooling. Above the storage pit, air tunnels were carved to capture the desert wind. As the air rushed downward, it cooled dramatically, creating a natural refrigeration cycle. Some of these systems were linked directly to qanats, underground aqueducts that brought cold mountain water into the city. The result was astonishing. In one of the hottest places on Earth, water froze without a single machine. From these domes came a new kind of luxury. In royal gardens, fountains gurgled with chilled water. Dishes of fruit were served on crushed ice. The rich and powerful of the Persian Empire held summer feasts surrounded by flowers, the air perfumed with rose water and mint. Guests would sip sherbets made with snow, sugar, and lemon, a taste so rare that poets compared it to paradise. In the court of the Shahs, ice was more precious than gold. And yet, beyond the wealth and splendor, the yakchal was also a symbol of wisdom. Persian architects believed that true mastery of nature came not from fighting it, but from working with it. The dome's shape mimicked the flow of wind, the pit embraced the cool of the earth, and the night itself became an ally. The people of Persia didn't conquer their environment. They listened to it. As centuries passed, this knowledge became sacred. Families who built or maintained the yakchals were respected like priests. Their craft was passed down in whispers, how deep to dig, how thick to mix the plaster, how to align the dome with the wind. To lose that knowledge was to lose life itself in a land of heat. But even these cold vaults could not stay secret forever. Traders who crossed the Silk Road saw them, marveled at them, and carried tales of frozen gardens back westward. They spoke of cities where ice was harvested in winter and still gleamed in summer, where water seemed to sleep and wake as commanded by man. Europe would not believe it at first, but the story of the yakchal, of those who caught winter in clay, would soon change the way the world understood cold. For in Persia, frost was not just survival. It was beauty, art, and proof that even under a blazing sun, humankind could summon snow. The secret of frozen water did not stay buried in the Persian sands. It traveled, slowly, like a whisper across centuries, carried by traders, conquerors, and pilgrims who saw the miracle of ice in the desert and could not forget it. Along the Silk Road, caravans moved not just silk and spice, but stories. Tales of domes that birthed winter in midsummer reached the great cities of the Islamic world: Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, and from there across the sea to Spain and Sicily. The age of the yakchal was becoming the age of ice. In the courts of the Umayyad and Abbasid caliphates, where knowledge was worshipped as much as faith, scholars and architects began to study the Persian craft. They improved upon it, blending science with art. In Andalusia, Moorish engineers built their own neveras, stone ice houses inspired by the Persian design. They learned to harvest snow from the Sierra Nevada mountains and store it underground through the heat of summer. The snowmelt was compressed into dense blocks, wrapped in straw, and kept in shadowed chambers until the nobles of Cordoba or Granada demanded it for their feasts. Soon, Ice became a symbol of civilization itself, proof that a ruler's dominion extended beyond men and land, reaching even the elements. In the palaces of Al-Andalus, fountains bubbled with cold water, while outside, the Andalusian sun blazed mercilessly. Servants carried chilled sherbets and icy drinks perfumed with rose petals and citrus. To guests, it felt like sorcery. To the caliphs, it was power. Power to defy nature, to command the impossible. From Spain, the art of ice traveled northward to Sicily and Italy, lands where mountains whispered to the sea. Here, a new kind of trade was born, the commerce of cold. Snow became an export, and men became its couriers. They were called nevatieri, snow gatherers, mountain climbers, and smugglers of frost. At dawn, they climbed into the high peaks of Etna or the Apennines, shoveling snow into burlap sacks lined with straw. They worked in silence, knowing the snow must reach the city before it melted. Their journeys were perilous. They descended through heat and dust, their mules burdened with melting treasure. Every delay was money lost. Every drop of water that escaped meant failure. But when they arrived, in Palermo, Naples, or Florence, they were greeted as heroes. Their cargo would chill wine in noble houses, preserve meat in kitchens, and cool fevered brows in sick rooms. By the 14th century, the ice trade had become a network of mountains, merchants, and miracles. Meanwhile, in the East, Arab scientists like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, and Al-Razi wrote about the science of cooling. They noted that cold could be created not only by snow, but by evaporation and salt, the same principle that would one day power modern refrigeration. They saw cold not as mystery, but as an element of balance, a divine harmony between air, earth, and water. To them, ice was a teacher, showing that nature could be guided by reason, not just magic. And so, the frozen knowledge of Persia bloomed in the Mediterranean, reshaped, reimagined, reborn. The domes of the desert became stone vaults in Spain. The shallow Persian pools turned into alpine pits in Italy. Everywhere, the same principle held true. The earth could hold cold if you treated it with patience and respect. But what began as a wonder of kings was now becoming an industry. Ice was no longer only for palaces. Merchants saw profit in it. Healers saw medicine. In Sicily, ice cooled fevers. In southern Spain, it preserved fish for the markets. Across the Mediterranean, cold became not just a luxury, but a necessity. Still, the secret had not yet reached the heart of Europe. Beyond the Alps, peasants and nobles alike lived and died with the seasons, never imagining that men elsewhere dined on chilled fruit in August. Yet the tide was turning. Word of this trade in winter crept northward, following merchants, monks, and wandering scholars. And soon, the dream of summer ice would arrive in France and Italy, carried not by wind or prayer, but by the steady rhythm of human hands shaping the impossible into reality. By the time ice reached Europe's heartlands, it had transformed from myth to marvel, and from marvel to commerce. In the glittering cities of Renaissance Italy, the air buzzed with trade, art, and ambition. Yet hidden behind the painted frescoes and marble fountains was a far less glamorous profession, the men who brought winter to the rich. They were the nevatieri, Europe's first ice merchants, mountain men whose lives were bound to the cruel rhythm of cold and time. At dawn, when most of the city still slept, these men began their ascent into the mountains. Their breath steamed in the thin air as they trudged upward with shovels and ropes, their boots sinking into drifts that reached their waists. They knew every fold of the terrain, where the snow was pure, where avalanches slept, and where danger lurked behind silence. They shoveled by hand, filling burlap sacks with snow, compressing it with straw, and binding the bundles with twine. For every 10 sacks they filled, only half would survive the journey down. The rest would melt, wasted to the mountain sun. Their work was brutal, but their reward was gold. By the 14th century, ice had become a trade good as precious as spice. Noble households demanded it for feasts, physicians prescribed it for fevers, and apothecaries used it to preserve herbs and potions. In Florence, barrels of snow descended from the Apennines. In Naples, blocks of ice were stored in deep stone pits called neviere, carved into the earth. Cities even appointed ice officials to regulate the trade, ensuring the nobility always had enough to cool their wine, while the poor watched from afar, their thirst unquenched. The Nevatieri risked everything for their craft. They worked in silence, racing the sun, their backs bowed beneath melting loads. A single misstep could send them tumbling into ravines. Some never returned. Yet they kept climbing, year after year, because ice meant survival. A good haul could feed a family through winter. A failed one could ruin them. For every block of ice delivered, there was a trail of sweat, frostbite, and loss. Once the ice reached the city, it entered a second world, a world of elegance and spectacle. Servants carried it into noble kitchens, where it hissed and crackled as it touched hot iron pots. It was packed into cellars lined with straw, sealed with sawdust and salt to last through summer. And when the heat became unbearable, the masters of these houses would summon their servants to fetch a sliver of the frozen treasure. They would sip chilled wine from silver cups, as poets sang of the taste of snow in July. But not all ice was destined for luxury. In Venice, traders learned to preserve fish in snow-filled barrels, extending their reach across the Adriatic. In France, butchers cooled their meat with it, saving lives unknowingly by slowing decay. Slowly, ice began to step down from the tables of kings to the hands of merchants, healers, and craftsmen. It became both miracle and medicine. The church, too, took notice. Monks stored snow in their abbeys, using it to keep wine cool for communion or to ease the suffering of the sick. Some even wrote about the spiritual virtue of cold, claiming that just as ice purified the body, so too did prayer cool the soul's fire. Within cloister walls, the pursuit of cold became a quiet devotion, another way to praise the Creator through understanding His creation. Still, ice remained a thing of wonder. For most peasants, it was only a story, something seen once in winter and gone before spring. They heard of nobles who owned cellars where frost lingered all year, and of travelers who spoke of mountains where men harvested snow like wheat. To them, these tales bordered on myth. How could anyone possess winter in the middle of July? But the Nevatieri knew. They had seen the fragile power of frost, the way it melted at the touch of sunlight, the way it vanished between one breath and the next. They knew they were carrying not just ice, but time itself. And perhaps, in those moments when they watched a block of snow sparkle beneath the summer sky, they understood better than anyone else what their work truly meant: to hold on to the fleeting, to defy decay, to preserve what should be lost. Europe was learning the same lesson Persia had discovered centuries before: that mastery over nature did not come through conquest, but through patience. In the creak of wagon wheels and the slow drip of melting snow, a quiet revolution was taking shape. A revolution of cold that would change the way humans lived, feasted, and survived. By the late Middle Ages, ice had transcended trade. It had become a mystery to be studied, a force to be understood. While merchants hauled it from the mountains, another kind of mind sought to create it from nothing. In the echoing stone chambers of monasteries and the dim candle-lit workshops of alchemists, men in robes began asking a heretical question for their time. Could cold itself be made? To most people, cold was simply the absence of warmth, something that arrived with winter and left with spring. But to scholars of the 13th and 14th centuries, it became something deeper, something divine. Theologians believed cold represented purity, humility, and order, the opposite of fire's chaos. And in a world where religion and science often danced together uneasily, the pursuit of cold became a quest for both knowledge and holiness. Monks in Northern Europe began experimenting in their cloisters. In abbeys like Cluny and Westminster, they dug deep cellars beneath stone floors, discovering that the earth's steady chill could keep food fresh for months. Some even noticed that if water was placed in shallow bowls on clear nights, it could freeze faster, a rediscovery of the Persian method. Others discovered the strange effect of salt. Mix it with snow, and the temperature drops dramatically. They didn't know it yet, but they were playing with the earliest principles of thermodynamics. In the Islamic world, alchemists and physicians such as Al-Razi and Ibn Sina recorded methods to cool water and medicines without snow. They used chemicals like sal ammoniac or potassium nitrate to draw heat away, noting in wonder how liquids froze even in warm rooms. These artificial frosts fascinated scholars. Some saw it as divine mimicry, man's attempt to imitate creation itself. In Baghdad, scholars wrote treatises on how air may be thickened by nature's will into cold. It was both science and prayer. Europe's scholars soon joined the pursuit. Roger Bacon, the English philosopher, spoke of cold as a power of contraction, a natural element that could be mastered. Alchemists believed that to understand cold was to glimpse the secrets of life and death. For freezing stopped decay, suspended motion, and in a way, preserved time. Some even claimed that within ice lay the key to immortality. To touch it was to touch eternity. Within monasteries, where silence reigned and time was measured by bells, the monks found practical uses for their discoveries. They cooled wine for visiting nobles. They stored fish, fruit, and dairy in cold rooms insulated with straw. They even made rudimentary ice creams, sweetened milk frozen with salt and snow, offered to bishops on feast days. To outsiders, it seemed like magic. To the monks, it was order, a way to reflect divine balance in the physical world. But as with all knowledge in the medieval age, there was fear. The Church warned against excessive fascination with nature's secrets. To create frost in summer was one thing. To claim mastery over it was another. Some alchemists were accused of witchcraft, their experiments with forbidden cold condemned as tampering with God's design. Still, the work continued, hidden in manuscripts, whispered in Latin, passed between minds that would one day form the foundations of science. By the dawn of the Renaissance, the knowledge of cold had evolved from wonder to discipline. What had begun as superstition and myth, the work of spirits or saints, was becoming an early form of chemistry and physics. The dream of making ice without mountains or snow was no longer heresy, it was destiny. Humanity had tasted the impossible, and it would not be satisfied with winter alone. In monasteries, in secret workshops, and in the corners of ancient libraries, the torch of cold burned quietly. And though no one knew it then, those experiments, born of faith, fear, and curiosity, would one day lead to the machines that hum in our kitchens today. The monks and alchemists who stared at bowls of freezing water under candlelight were not just chasing miracles. They were, unknowingly, inventing the future. The nobles of medieval Europe had a gift for spectacle, and nothing stunned their guests quite like ice in summer. Imagine entering a great hall in July, when the air outside shimmered like molten glass, only to find the Lord's table glistening with frost. Candles flickered against silver platters piled high with chilled fruit, crystal goblets filled with icy sherbets, and pitchers sweating with condensation. The air carried the scent of cold wine and crushed mint. For most, it was a feast. For the guests, it was sorcery. To possess ice in summer was to possess dominion over nature itself. It was more than luxury. It was power. In France, the royal kitchens of Louis XIV and later Francis I stored ice and snow brought from the Alps, preserved in deep stone vaults beneath their estates. In Italy, the Medici family dazzled visiting dignitaries by serving gelati, a sweetened, fruit-flavored snow that became the ancestor of modern sorbet. And in Spain's Alhambra, Moorish rulers cooled rosewater drinks with ice hauled from Sierra Nevada, a shimmering symbol of divine favor in the Andalusian sun. Every great feast was an act of theater. Servants dressed in livery rushed between tables, carrying silver bowls filled with frozen fruit, each piece glistening like polished jewels. Musicians played softly while guests marveled at the impossible cold against their tongues. In Venice, frozen lemon juice and sugar became the talk of the city, the first whispers of sorbetto. In Naples, ices flavored with jasmine and orange blossoms turned dining into poetry. These weren't meals. They were performances, where the rarest ingredient was winter itself. Behind the glamour, however, lay a web of labor and danger. The nevatieri, the mountain snow harvesters, were still climbing through blizzards to collect snow in January so that lords could dine coolly in June. Caravans of mules trudged through thawing passes, their loads packed in straw and hope. Every block of ice that reached a banquet table carried the weight of exhaustion and peril. To taste cold fruit in July was, unknowingly, to taste 1,000 miles of human struggle. And yet even the servants who fetched it felt awe. When they opened the storage pits deep beneath the kitchens and the first rush of cold air escaped, it felt like standing at the border of two worlds. One, the burning present; the other, a memory of winter long gone. In that moment, the impossible seemed tamed, and that illusion was worth every drop of sweat. In the Arab world, where the science of cooling had already flourished, ice had an added meaning: purity and hospitality. A host who could offer cold water to a guest in the desert sun was seen as blessed, almost saintly. In the great cities of Cairo and Baghdad, markets sold snow from distant mountains packed in palm leaves, and vendors shouted praises to Allah for this miracle of relief. Ice became a bridge between worlds, between science and faith, luxury and survival. But the nobility did not merely use ice for pleasure, they wielded it as propaganda. To offer chilled wine in midsummer was to show mastery, not over men, but over creation itself. Kings and queens displayed their frozen delicacies as proof that their reigns were ordained by divine power, that even the laws of nature bowed before their wealth and will. "Only God and I can bring winter in July," one Italian noble is said to have boasted, raising his frosted cup beneath the blazing sun. What none of them realized was that their obsession with cold would ignite something greater than vanity. From their banquets and their demands, new industries were born. Ice pits grew larger, snow routes expanded, techniques for preservation improved. Each feast, each cup of chilled wine, pushed humanity closer to understanding how to command temperature itself. The rich believed they were indulging in luxury. In truth, they were financing innovation. The pursuit of cold, of that fleeting, forbidden sensation of winter in summer, was slowly reshaping the very fabric of daily life. The miracle on their tables was no longer a curiosity. It was a glimpse of the future. For most people of the medieval world, ice was a rumor, a tale carried by travelers, whispered by servants, or glimpsed once in a noble's kitchen before vanishing like a dream. The peasants who worked the fields under an unrelenting summer sun knew no such luxury. Yet even without ice, they learned to summon coolness through patience, cunning, and nature's rhythm. Their methods were not born of wealth or science, but of observation. An art of survival passed quietly from hand to hand. In the countryside of France, farmers carved root cellars deep into the earth, their walls cool and damp year-round. These underground chambers became their lifeline, storing milk, butter, and meat in woven baskets hung from the ceiling to keep rats and mold at bay. In England, villagers placed clay pots in shaded wells, where groundwater remained chill even in August. In Italy and Spain, women wrapped wine jugs in wet cloth and hung them from trees, letting the breeze draw heat away drop by drop, a primitive but astonishingly effective form of evaporative cooling. It wasn't science, it was instinct, and centuries of trial and error. Peasants knew which side of the hill stayed cold longest, how stone could hold a night's chill until midday, how a flowing stream could preserve cheese longer than any cellar. They lived not in defiance of the seasons, but in harmony with them. Where the rich used servants, the poor used shadows. Where the nobles demanded miracles, the peasants learned quiet tricks of endurance. Every region had its own wisdom. In the Balkans, shepherds built milk caves, natural hollows in the mountains where cold air gathered. In the Middle East, villagers kept butter submerged in clay jars under spring water. In Northern Europe, families dug pits lined with straw and moss, the ancestors of modern ice cellars, to store what little frost they could gather in winter. To them, this was not luxury. It was survival. Even the idea of cold took on spiritual meaning. Medieval peasants saw it as cleansing, a sign of divine renewal. When frost covered the fields, it meant the world was being purified, the soil resting for rebirth. The first snow of the year was celebrated like a holy event, a promise that spring would come again. To the poor, winter's bite was cruel, but also sacred. They did not own cold. They revered it. Still, every so often, a traveler from the city would bring tales of the Lord's icy banquets, of sherbets and chilled wine, of nobles who dined in rooms so cold their breath fogged the air. The peasants would listen, half in disbelief, half in wonder. "They eat winter," someone would mutter, shaking his head. To the laborers of the earth, it seemed unnatural, a mockery of the world's order. Perhaps even sinful, and yet curiosity lingered. In the villages of the Pyrenees, mountain folk began to mimic what they heard. During harsh winters, they packed snow into barrels, sealed it with straw, and buried it in barns. Months later, they would unearth it, damp, slushy, but still cool enough to refresh. It was a poor man's miracle, but a miracle nonetheless. While the nobles displayed ice as a symbol of control, the commoners found beauty in simply keeping cool, in a shaded stream, a cellar's stillness, or a cup of well water after a long day in the fields. Their mastery of the humble and the practical would outlast the palaces. For when the empires fell and the courts grew silent, the peasants' ways remained. By the end of the Middle Ages, their wisdom, quiet, local, uncelebrated, formed the backbone of something extraordinary, the human understanding of natural temperature control, the illusion of cold that peasants crafted from wind, water, and shade would become the foundation for the modern science of cooling. They never saw themselves as innovators, yet in their simple acts of survival, they preserved the essence of what the world's richest men were desperately chasing: the dream of comfort against the tyranny of heat. The story of how medieval people made ice in summer ends not with an invention, but with a revelation. That genius doesn't always roar in laboratories or palaces, but whispers across centuries through patience, observation, and will. From the deserts of Persia to the mountains of Europe, humanity learned to shape cold from the raw materials of the earth: wind, water, and night. And though their domes have crumbled and their cellars fallen silent, their mastery endures in every hum of a modern refrigerator, every cube of ice that clinks in a glass. The Yakchals of Persia still stand, their conical silhouettes rising from the sand like the bones of sleeping giants. Archaeologists have found that even after 1,000 years, the inner chambers remain astonishingly cool, a testament to engineering so advanced it bordered on the miraculous. Their builders never used blueprints, never studied thermodynamics, yet they understood airflow, insulation, and condensation better than most would centuries later. Each dome was a symphony of physics, performed by men who knew nothing of the word science, but everything of nature. In Europe, the legacy of the Nevatieri, the snow-gatherers, lived on long after their trade faded. The snow pits of the Alps became the prototypes for ice houses across France and England. By the 17th century, noble estates across Europe were building underground chambers lined with brick and straw to preserve winter snow year-round. The idea that had begun in the Persian desert had now become a symbol of refinement, wealth, and progress. But perhaps the most beautiful inheritance from that age is not architectural or mechanical, it's philosophical. Medieval people believed that mastering the elements was not about domination, but harmony. The Persians listened to the night's breath. The monks studied the stillness of air and earth. The peasants trusted the rhythm of water and wind. Their success came not from overpowering nature, but from learning her secrets quietly, patiently, reverently. When modern refrigeration emerged centuries later, first with ice houses, then with chemical coolants, and finally with electric compressors, it was built on the shoulders of those forgotten innovators. Engineers rediscovered what medieval builders already knew: that air, when guided correctly, can carry away heat, that temperature is not fixed but flows, that cold is not absence but potential. Today, when we open a freezer and find endless winter at our fingertips, it is easy to forget how unnatural that miracle once was. But imagine the first nobleman who tasted chilled wine in August, the Persian child who watched frost form beneath a desert moon, the Venetian merchant who saw snow fall from a mule's pack in midsummer. To them, ice was not a convenience. It was proof that human ingenuity could turn the impossible into reality. In the end, the medieval quest for ice was never just about temperature. It was about power, faith, and the unyielding hunger to outthink the world itself. It united kings and peasants, alchemists and laborers, scholars and dreamers. It reminded humanity that even in its most primitive age, it possessed a spark, the desire to transform the ordinary. And so, the next time you drop a cube of ice into your drink and watch it dissolve into silence, remember, this is not just frozen water. It is a fragment of history, a ghost of the Persian night, a whisper from the alpine snowfields, a legacy carved in frost by people who dared to challenge the sun. They lived in a world of fire, and they learned to make winter